this is the 10th year, 11th year. I lose track of
10th
time.
year, 10th year.
Okay. And they've only had one tough decision, and that was the first year. TCU and Baylor and Ohio State. And Ohio State won the title as the 4 seed and controversially got in. It's been pretty cut and dry since then. Or you've had 3 teams and nobody really cared about, who got in at the 4th team. This is the first time that there is not an option for them that makes sense. There is not. Like you said, you're going to have to lock out the SEC. That's one option. You can lock out a Texas team that beat Alabama by double digits on its home field. That's another option. Or you can lock out Florida State, who has not lost this season, and beat a top 15 team with its 3rd-string quarterback, which somehow is a negative in some people's minds. That should be something that tells me how impressive you are. So it's all bad options for the committee, and my advice to the committee is if they have security systems on their home, I would make sure that those are working well because people are going to be mad tomorrow. That's just what it is. And I don't know what they're going to do, Ari. I think if I'm projecting what I think they will do, I think they're going to leapfrog Alabama over Texas, and I think they're going to include Florida State. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think they're going to do. What they should do is include the 3 unbeatens and put Texas in because, Ari, as you witnessed in person, that game happened. But all the options are going to be controversial, and this is what they don't pay the committee members for.
Yeah. Well, if you're looking on the screen right now, here's the Athletics updated bowl projections. We update them as games come in throughout the entire month of November, and these are the final projections here. That looks like we're projecting as a company Michigan number 1 versus number 4 Florida State, number 2 Washington against Alabama in the Sugar. The first game was the Rose Bowl. I don't know how much you can buy into that. I'm not trying to be a bad company man, but I legitimately don't know what they're going to do. Now, the thing that I think is interesting here, let me lay it out here. First of all, Michigan's in, Washington is in.
Yes. Those are the only 2 teams that can sleep well.
Those are the only 2 teams that can just say they're in. Mm-hmm. So now we are in a situation where we're picking between 3 teams for the final 2 spots. No matter what 2 they pick, the 3rd team will feel like they got screwed, and rightfully so. So we have Florida State, who is now an undefeated Power 5 champion with 3 top 25 wins.
And it also be a touchdown plus underdog to every team, and maybe every team in the top 10, maybe top 8.
It also beat both SEC schools it had on the schedule in LSU and Florida. It did. And the Seminoles are now obviously being debated because Jordan Travis broke his leg. If he didn't break his leg, we're not having this conversation, and we're having a even more entertaining conversation, which is Alabama and Texas for the final spot. So the other 2 teams, and I guess if you want to throw Georgia in there, they're a 1-loss champion with 3 top 25 wins.
I don't think Georgia's going to get any serious conversation in the room.
There's nothing to even discuss there. Yeah, they're done. So Alabama's a 1-loss SEC champion who just beat Georgia in the conference title game that you were at. The Crimson Tide now have 4 wins over top 25 opponents and ended the Bulldogs' 29-game winning streak. It seems almost unthinkable to leave the SEC out. So that's where we are. But the only reason why we can think about it is because the other team that's still in the mix is a 1-loss Big 12 champion with 3 top 25 wins in Texas, including perhaps the best win in the sport this year, which is a 10-point victory over that same Alabama team that is the SEC champ.
In Tuscaloosa. It should be noted.
And how could the committee possibly leave out the Longhorns when they literally beat the Crimson Tide on the field?
Well, if you're going to make the case, if you're the committee, the case is that we think Alabama was better over 12 games, and they've got some good wins, but game control also matters. And if you look at the full body of work, as Nick Saban requested that people do, I mean, Alabama has not been a dominant team this year. I laid it out in my column. They lost to Texas convincingly. They were beaten handily in that game. Trailed by double digits at half to Tennessee. They got dragged into the weird game at USF in the rain, whatever. I don't know what Alabama was doing, but that game happened. That was a real game. Jimbo didn't show up really, way conservative at Kyle Field. They barely won that game and trailed in that game. Almost coughed up a big lead at Arkansas. They're up 24-6, almost lost that game. And then, of course, last week they needed a miracle to beat a not very good Auburn team. So what are we even talking about with Alabama here if they want to make the case that they're that they've clearly been better if you look at the body of work than Texas. There is not a case to be made there. There might be a case to be made about Georgia, but Georgia lost their last game, lost it convincingly, is not a conference champion. So I don't think that's really going to be a part of that at all, despite the fact that Georgia has been dominant and has some quality wins. I don't think they're going to be considered. So I suspect they're going to do it just because of the way that the rankings looked last week. I mean, Alabama was one spot behind them and beat the number one team handily, and Texas played a top 15 team and won and did well. But that's what I think they're going to do. But it doesn't make sense if you look at the full body
that
work.
I think we have to at least say on the show, Dave. You have done the mock playoff committee. I've done the mock playoff committee. If you're unaware of what we're talking about, they invite, I think, 13 or 15 media members every year to Grapevine, Texas, to go through the final ranking exercise with the completed resumes in order to give us a feel for how the discussions go, the protocols that they use, and the way that they arrive at their rankings. And the thing,
and I think real quick, Ari, before we go into that, it should be noted, because I think a lot of people truly don't understand this. It's not 13 people in a room making their top 25 and they mash it together. I think some people don't understand.
Yes, this is what I'm getting to.
Yeah, it's not worth really going through the full process, but it's a much more complicated process than
But
that.
the reason why I wanted to bring this up
ranking
here, Dave, is that they rank the teams in pods. And this is an important distinction, because there are a lot of people out there, and rightfully so, if you're just thinking about it like a rational human being, Texas beat Alabama, Texas should go, what are we talking about? But they will rank these teams in pods, and I believe the first pod is pods of 3. So they'll rank their top 3 teams, and there will be people in that committee, I'm sure of it, that will rank Alabama in the top 3. So there could be a scenario where Alabama and Texas are never compared head to head, which then nullifies the tiebreaker.
But hang on, Ari, because I actually don't think that's true. I don't think that's true, because they'll have that. But then what the committee also does is when you have the rankings on the board,
then they can go
call
back
it out
look.
and say, hey, is there anything we want to talk about? And in that point, then you're saying, hey, are we sure we want to have Texas
let me push back on you on that a little bit.
They will be. That will come
Not
up.
push back. Do you think, and in your heart of hearts, you were at the game today. I watch it on TV. I think anybody who watches college football watched that game knowing what both of those teams with the heavyweight athletes that they have on those fields are capable of. I'm not going to go on a Stars Matter diatribe on this episode so you guys can breathe easy. But do you think there is a world, legitimately speaking, where the SEC and no Group A teams are in this field tomorrow?
Yes, I do. I really do. I don't know that we're going to get there, but I think it's definitely possible. I think it's probably almost 50-50, maybe a little bit less. It just depends. There's a lot of coaches in that room, right? And I think that clearly Georgia and Alabama are the two most talented teams in the country. Georgia's looked like the best team in the country all season long. Alabama's gotten hot late. You can make a case for Alabama as the second or third best team in the country if you played out. This is the one thing that I wrote about in my column. Okay, and I'll make the case here. I think if you had a 12-team playoff and you played it out 100 times, Georgia wins it like 55 times. Alabama probably wins it 30 times. But here's the issue. We don't have a 12-team playoff. We aren't going to play it 100 times. We have a 14 playoff. We have a season that had actual games and actual results, and the committee does not deal with hypotheticals. The committee has never put a team in ahead of somebody because of hypotheticals, or we think they would. In fact,
if you say the word hypothetically to a committee member, they melt.
They'll
like
say
the
yes.
Wicked Witch of the day.
Yes.
They cannot do it. So
hypothetically, yeah, I agree. Alabama and Georgia would probably wipe the floor with maybe the top 5 or 6 teams. But
you're not. But focusing on from this point of view, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I have to tell you this. You're there. But if it's not the best win in the country, I think Texas owns the best win, because the best win is over Alabama.
Maybe.
And it was on the road. But do you actually think that the committee members who know everything about college football that you're supposed to know about college football could leave out a team that beat Georgia in Atlanta in a dome? Like, do you think that their brain chemistry could allow that to happen?
It's not that simple. And I think that when you look at the totality of the picture and the strength of the candidates that you're picking against, which is strong, this is the strongest playoff field we've ever had. Ever. It's not even close. We have 6 teams that are legitimate candidates, and that are playoff caliber teams. And I
think it should just be 5. I think it's 5.
I mean, Georgia's a playoff team, Ari. They're not going to get consideration, but they're a playoff caliber team.
Okay,
Obviously.
I just mean from the ones that are actually going to get consideration.
Well, but I'm talking about consideration versus would get consideration in most years, and you could throw Ohio State in there as well.
I was going to say, then throw it to 7 or 6. Yeah,
exactly.
They're the same team right now.
That. Yeah. We've never had that. Usually, like you've alluded to, sometimes we're struggling to get 4 in there, right? And TCU lost their conference championship game last year and still got in, and it wasn't even really that close last year. I think we kind of knew they were going to get in ahead of Alabama, so who didn't win their division, it should be noted, last year to even play for their conference title. So, man, it is. I think if you look at it that way, then you can say, well, it's hard to see them doing that. But when you look at it, it's the case. It's not a case against the SEC. It's not a case against Alabama, against Georgia, if we won't even throw them in there. It's about, look at the other teams, okay? You have 3 undefeated Power 5 champs, and you have a Texas team that beat Alabama by double digits on its home field, and their resumes are pretty close, and has been killing people. Texas has not had, and again, that's what I'm saying. You compare the amount of, shenanigans that Alabama has had to get in and out of to get to this point. Texas, Ari, they kind of messed around at TCU a little bit, but they were always probably going to win that game. They lose in the last seconds to a top 15 team in a rivalry game on a neutral field, so you have a pretty good loss. Am I forgetting a Texas game? They haven't really messed around.
You could say Kansas State if you think that's messing around.
Well, but you also had your backup quarterback, and you won.
Yeah,
and Kansas State is a good team, so I don't really count that. That's just playing your season. You got to win, And if you have your backup quarterback, it is.
Can I float something to you here, Dave?
Player. Please do.
I want to float something to you, and this is something I've been thinking about, and I don't know if it's true, but I've been thinking about it because you and I were in very interesting scenarios in 2014. I was a beat writer for Ohio State, and you were working at Dave's Texas football, right?
No, I was at Fox.
Oh, you were? But you were very much regionally involved in the
based
coverage
in Texas,
of
covering most of it, covering the Big 12, yeah.
So your publication and where you were. So my understanding and my viewpoint of the 2014 playoff debate, and if you don't remember the 2014, the first inaugural playoff debate, you had Ohio State and you had a Baylor and TCU Big 12 situation where there was no conference championship game and there was some
they were co-champs.
Misunderstanding of which co-champs, one beat the other, but then the other team lost to another. I can't even remember. It was a complicated discussion.
Basically, Baylor came back from down 21 to beat TCU in Waco, and then and then Baylor lost by, I think, 2 touchdowns on the road to West Virginia 3 weeks later.
So what I think, in my understanding back then of the way that the committee probably approached that, and I'm going to wrap it around to this year too before we move on, is that if you have 2 teams in the same conference that are indistinguishable from one another to a certain extent, and you have another team that is Ohio State, deep, talented, whatever, but they were with their third string quarterback, and they beat Wisconsin 59-0 in the Big Ten championship game, that rather than picking between TCU and Baylor, which was an impossible decision to make, that they picked the third option because it was cleaner to accept. If you're a Big 12 fan, you can't pick one or the other, so you pick the third option. The third option goes and wins the national championship. And I bring this up, Dave, because I'm thinking about Alabama and Texas and how they are both intertwined in this debate that is very hard. Texas beats Alabama in September. It's important to note that the committee doesn't care when the win happens. All that matters is that it's a part of your resume.
Yes.
But then Alabama is the pure candidate. The college football playoff was made to fall in love with this candidate. If you cannot pick between Texas and Alabama, then what is the final move there? Doing something that's never been done before.
In theory, but why can't you pick between Texas and Alabama?
Pick one.
Texas. They played. It wasn't close.
I would too. I think there's a difference between what you think and what they're going to do, though.
I guess, but I don't even think it's a debate. If Texas had a terrible resume, like they didn't play anybody else the whole season, the Big 12 was way down. They had one other top 25 win or something like that. And Bama had a ton of wins and had been really dominant. I'll engage the conversation.
If
That's not what's happened.
the
Texas has been
committee-
more dominant and has played a bunch of really good teams.
If the committee has a mental block or an inability to eliminate Alabama from this field, they cannot do so in good faith while also leaving out Texas, which leaves us with the third option. I'm trying to inch you towards what I'm trying to say here, which is if you're ever
Can't
going
do
to
it.
see a undefeated Power 5
Can't do
team,
it.
but what is the solution that has the least amount of outrage?
There's not one, Ari. It's going to be bad either way.
I didn't say there's not going to be outrage. Which one has the least amount? The entire country is basically in agreement that Florida State doesn't have the chops. And it's not right. I'm not. And listen, if we're just talking this through, guys, I'm not saying what I think. If it were up to me, it would be Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Florida State. Those would be my four.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we might be in agreement on that.
Well.
But we're trying to talk through what they might do. That's who cares what I want. Who cares what Dave wants? It's what the committee is going to be talking about and having.
They're
to
unpredictable,
do when we get
and the stakes are
so.
higher.
And if it's they're unpredictable, the stakes are higher. It's unprecedented, and somebody is guaranteed to get screwed. Somebody's getting screwed. So what is the path of least resistance to screwing somebody? Do you screw the one-loss Big 12 champ that beat Bama on the road? Do you screw the Bama team that just beat Georgia for the first loss in 2 years? Or do you screw the team that can't score because their third-string quarterback's running the show and looks like crap on television? Which one do you choose?